Hello and welcome to Exit and Elevate, another monthly conversation brought to you by The Purpose Post by Career Steward. I am Shaté Hayes, your facilitator, host, and founder of The Purpose Post, where we produce articles, content, conversations, all centered around purpose, freedom, and growth. And today I'm so excited to have my sister from another mister, people saying that, Dominiece Clifton here. We featured her on the Purpose Post. I'll have her article up in just a second. But welcome, Dominiece. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey girl. Yes, at this point we are definitely locked in. So hey everyone. Shaté, thank you first for having me. I always love when we are able to be in conversation and community. So it's truly an honor, and it's been a while since I've been behind the mic. And so yeah, it's just good to be here. So I am Dominiece Clifton. I'm a clarity coach and a business strategist, and I help women entrepreneurs and women nonprofit founders gain the clarity and confidence they need to birth their visions and to grow their organizations. And I like to think that the work that I do is like a business doula, because a lot of times when women come to me, they have this idea on their heart, they can kind of see the vision and where they want to go, but they're unsure of how to get there. And it's a birthing process, right? Like birthing our dreams. And so that's really like how sacred I look at my work in this process. And so I'm honored every day to show up and be able to support other women with, bringing their visions to life.
I love that. I heard someone recently, I was talking to actually a friend of mine, say that she called herself a midwife, like a purpose midwife. And I was like, I really like that connection to birthing, as you just said. And I think about myself, years and years ago, or even recently as a couple of years ago, but when I was first starting to sort of produce things on my own, and I was a freelance dancer and looking for ways to, make it more of a business, and I would hire coaches, and I really was just looking for someone to tell me what to do. Do you know what I mean? Like, tell me how to start it. But I didn't know about coaches back then, that it was like you're finding someone who has grown their business in a very specific way. And so they're just teaching you how to grow it in the way that they've grown it. Right. And so I spent a lot of time really frustrated about, like, just someone see me and what I'm trying to do and tell me what to do in terms of what I'm trying to do. Right. So that's a whole other conversation for another day. But what I wanted to say about that is that what you're doing is very relatable and very real, and, really, really valuable and important. And in terms of our conversation, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And like, your background is in wellness. And so we want to lift up sort of this more personal conversation around professional development. I'll just, for those who are listening in or who are catching the replay, we have Dominique profiled on the Purpose Post with this article here. Make sure that you check it out. And in the article, we really sort of uncovered or dove a little deeper into your 4% formula, right? So, that formula, which we'll touch on a little bit more in the conversation, like really sort of help you to change your life, turn your life around. So, with you discovering this formula, darkest moments of your life, what was that session like? You said in our conversation, which got to the article, that it was like a divine download, right? So can you tell us, set the scene for us? What was that like meditation session like? And like, how did you know like whatever you got from that download would be more than what you were already doing, if that makes sense? More transformative than what you were already doing.
Yeah. So first off, I got to give you your flowers because the article was fire. I've had, enough things written up on me to like have it to compare to. And I remember reading it and being like, damn, like she really saw me, right? Like I felt that when I was reading those words. And so I just want to say thank you for writing such a beautiful, write up of my journey. I don't take that lightly. You said the last part of your question was, how did I know that meditation session or this 4% formula would change my life? I didn't, honestly, when I started. I didn't know that 5 years later I would be here having this conversation or, talking to other people and having these types of conversations. So to set the scene for what that was like, it was 5 years ago. So I remember in February of 2020, I had just come back from a friend's wedding in New Orleans. And when I say like, they could not have scheduled that more perfectly, because the week that everybody was kind of coming back from New Orleans, COVID was like really starting to pick up. And that's when they were starting to quarantine. I was like, girl, a week later, y'all would have had to cancel this whole thing. So we were kind of coming off of that. And I, was away for a few days, didn't really have to think about my life, but I got back and I was kind of sitting in the reality of what my life was at that point. So I was unemployed at that time. I had just quit my job a few months before in December of 2019. And at that time, when I quit my job, I had just had a newborn daughter about maybe 2 or 3 months before in September. And I had always had to advocate for benefits and like the most basic things, pay, decent salary. And so at that point, I was like, I'm just going to take a slightly longer maternity leave and now jump back into, the workforce. Of course, I didn't know 3 months later after I quit that COVID was around the corner. So I was unemployed, did not have a plan for that. I had actually just launched or just started with another business partner, a brick and mortar natural hair salon. And again, COVID comes and shuts down everything that's non-essential work. And so it's like I got this personal loan because I took on most of the financial responsibility of it. And we have this building, and like, how are we about to pay for this, right?
Yes.
I was in the midst of that. I had a newborn and a 3-year-old. Daycare shuts down, so I'm like in the thick of that. At that time, I was still married, but my marriage was on the rocks. We've now since separated and divorced, so we were kind of in the thick of it then as well. And I didn't have no answers. I have no answers for how to get out of this like dark mess that I had found myself in. And the only thing that I knew how to do at that point was to be still, right? To start to pray, to meditate, and to hope that God would send me a lifeline, is like the words that I use. Because I was just like, player, I don't know how to get myself out of this one. And that's exactly what happened. So I was meditating one day. I'd meditated on and off for years at that point, but it had been very inconsistent. But I started meditating more frequently. And then one day, in the midst of meditating somewhere between February and March, I got this download that said every day for the next 90 days, focus on your mind, your body, and your spirit. And I did that 90-day challenge, and it changed my life completely. It was
Yeah.
hard in the beginning because I'd never been consistent up until that point. I hadn't been consistent with anything. I would start and stop everything. So doing something for 90 days was a challenge, but I'm so grateful that I stuck with it and pushed through, because I came out of that a completely different version of myself. And I've continued to do that daily practice of nourishing all the parts of myself. And 5 years later, like I always tell people, if you had known the version of me that I was 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you wouldn't even recognize me, because I didn't have confidence. I wouldn't be able to show up and allow myself to be seen and have these sorts of conversations. I'm now guiding and coaching other women, because I see myself more fully and I believe in myself more fully. And so, yeah, there's the benefits of the wellness aspects that have come out of that process, right? Like being able to live healthier and to feel good. But outside of the physical aspects, it's the spiritual and the mental evolution that have really taken place over these last 5 years. And that's why I go so hard for this formula, because I've seen it change my life, and then I've seen it shared with other people and also enhance their lives as well.
Can you say more about that? Like, what have you seen? What was the change for you personally? Yes, I heard you say confidence, but like, was there anything else that you've seen in your life or in your client's life by just focusing on mind, body, and spirit?
Sure. So I'll say that coming out of that 90 days, right, I had lost weight. So I had always struggled with my weight from about 8 to 32 years old. So 25 years, I was, overweight, emotionally eating. My weight was always up and down. It was like a roller coaster relationship with food. And it was the one thing where I was like, man, like if I can just get a hold on this, I feel like I can do anything. But food just always like controlled my life. And so coming out of that process, I'd lost about 15 pounds in that 90 days. But my relationship with food changed during that time, because what happened was I realized that food was just me coping with internal issues and challenges that were going on. And so that 90 days began to let me peel back some of those layers that I had been running and hiding from, and begin to address those deeper things that were causing me to overeat. And so it was really the beginning of a healing process. And so the physical weight that came off was just a reflection of the things that I was releasing right during this 90-day period. There was, again, a lot of healing spiritually, a lot that I was holding on to. There was mental clarity. So before that, I would hear the word purpose and be so frustrated or intimidated by this concept of like, what is my purpose? Because I didn't have a clue. And coming out of that 90 days, I had much more clarity about my life and like my soul's mission and really what I came here to do. And that's continued to unfold, you know, over these last couple of years. But I just felt more sure of myself and like the steps that I wanted to take. And that honestly, coming out of that 90-day period, that was really the start of my entrepreneurial journey, right? I came out of that and I was like, I want to help and support other women and like help other people to feel as good as I feel. I had more energy, right? Like I just, you know, I feel like I was kind of sleepwalking through life before that point, and it was like I woke up, and so I had more energy physically. Yeah, I just was more sure of myself, and I will say the clarity that I got, I've seen translate with students as I share this process with them. So I have a 90-day business coaching program called Transformation University, and I support women entrepreneurs and women nonprofit founders with launching or growing their businesses. And I share this formula early on in my process with my students, and they use this process for the, you know, that 4% formula for 90 days. And just the level of clarity that they have by the time they finish the program, right, with their businesses, with their visions. So it allows you, this 4% formula, to be still, right? That's one of, I would say, one of the most powerful parts of this formula is that it allows you to be still, to connect with yourself, to go inward. And in doing that, we begin to understand ourselves better, to understand our purpose better, right? Like to understand and connect with spirit better. And that translates into so many things. And so those are some of the benefits that I would say that I've seen translate to my students as well.
Yeah, I think that self-awareness, self-acceptance part, to be able to sit with yourself, face yourself, that is really, really pivotal. I feel like I've heard, and maybe it's just what I'm picking up on because it's been such a journey that I've been on over the past couple of years, but I've even heard it from folks around me in terms of like this sort of awakening that's happening. Similar language too. I've heard someone say that at a certain point they felt like they were sleepwalking through life, and then they had this awakening moment. They all of a sudden found themselves in a routine and a practice that worked for them, that prioritized, again, their mind, body, and their spirit. And then it was like, ta-da, you know, that catapulted them to the next level. So I think that's really, I think, an important thing to highlight for sure. And I know we're talking a lot about, you know, folks who are self-employed entrepreneurs, but I think this applies to anyone, right? Every person. And when it comes to like us wanting to, you know, move forward in success, be successful in our professional lives, I think a lot of folks, the narrative I think is changing a little bit more now, but it's like, how do you find the time for, right? To prioritize yourself in that way, especially if you've got kids, if you're caregiving for loved ones, if you are, you know, like schedules are crazy, you got to do everything now. And I think that there could be some folks in the room or who are watching a replay is like, sure, yes, but I don't have the time for that, right? What do you say to those folks?
Yeah. So as you were asking me that question, my spirit was guiding me to like add one more thing to the previous question, and then I'll answer the question about time. I think one of the greatest benefits that I've gotten from this 4% formula over the last few years is the physical benefit of stress relief, right? So physical movement, moving our bodies daily, any sort of physical movement, it can be walking, jogging, you know, going to the gym, yoga, Zumba, swimming, whatever you like to do. Physical movement is the most efficient way to release stress from the body. And we know that our bodies hold our stress and our trauma, right? And so prior to 5 years ago, I wasn't, again, as consistent with movement. And so I was always stressed and overwhelmed and worried about life. And what this formula does, like this daily practice, is I like to think of it as a daily reset, right? So before I start today, I'm hitting the reset button at the top of the day by moving my body and allowing myself to release all the things that I started with, right? And just to be prepared and ready for today. So that's one of the greatest benefits, the stress relief, right? Instead of letting things build and pile up, it's every day you're hitting the reset button and giving yourself the emotional capacity to deal with today, right? And what happens is over time, you begin to notice that your immune system becomes stronger because you're no longer operating in a stress response. You're no longer in that fight, flight, freeze, right? And so now when I say I barely get sick, like over the last couple of years, I could probably count on one hand how many times I've been sick. And so those are also like that stress release part is also like a huge benefit of this formula, because so many people are walking around and don't even realize they're walking around in a state of sympathetic dominance, which is literally like your nervous system just always kind of being on guard and fighting, right? And that translates to so many ailments and diseases and, you know, mental fog and mental health issues. And so I just had to highlight that that's also a major benefit of this practice. Yeah.
I caught you say dis-ease. I like when people do that. It
Yeah.
is, you know, like what that actually is happening in your body.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what's that?
Oh, you were asking me about the question of time. Like, how do we make time for this?
Absolutely.
So this is a question that I get often. And the first thing I will say is I am a mama, a co-parenting mama of two. And what that means is that I do have their dad is in their life, but we split our children 50-50. And so when they're with me, I'm like a single mama, right? I don't have help, live in help or anything. So I'm a mom, right, of two young girls. They're 5 and 8. I run two businesses full time, right? And I have all of these other things that I'm doing outside of that. And so, like, I am also an extremely busy person who still makes time to prioritize myself. So, the 4% formula, when I have been doing this practice for myself for about 4 years before, 4.5 years before I started feeling guided to share it out. And I remember when I sat back and I thought about how can I share this out in a way that translates and resonates with people and is easy to remember. And so I started doing the math on like, well, how much time on average do I spend on feeding my mind? How much time do I spend moving my body, right? Like how much time do I spend connecting with myself and replenishing myself spiritually? And when I added it up, it's about 15 minutes of mindset, 15 minutes of a spiritual practice, and then 30 minutes, typically at least 30 minutes of movement. That comes up to 1 hour, right? And I was like, okay, so how much is 1 hour out of a 24-hour day? 1 hour is 4% of a 24-hour day. And so that's where the name for this formula comes from. And so before I answer the question of how do I make time, I just want to like set the tone of like, I'm asking you to give yourself 4% of your entire day. And when you hear it that way, it sounds a lot more feasible. It's like, I'm not asking you a lot, right? Like we're giving 8 hours to a job. We're giving all these extra hours to all of these other things. Surely we are worthy of 4%. And so to answer the question, the first thing that I would say is that it's a mindset shift, right? It requires a mindset shift because what happens is a lot of us are not used to prioritizing ourselves, especially as women of color, because we've been taught to put everyone else before us, right? And so it feels selfish. We feel guilty when we start taking time for ourselves because we have all of these other things on our to-do list that we feel like we should be doing. And so before you even look at your calendar and try to figure out how do I make time for this, you got to work on your mindset, right? And knowing that you are worthy and deserving of the time. So that's the first thing, right? That mindset shift that has to happen. And then the next thing I'll say is that every person that I work with, as far as like clients go, we're all busy. Millennials, we are doing the absolute most, right? Most of us, Gen X, Gen Z, everybody's doing, we doing too much. We're doing too much. So everyone is busy, right? But we can be creative about finding time in our day to prioritize ourselves. So if that means maybe waking up 15 minutes earlier to start your day with a little more intention in the morning and connecting with yourself for some stillness, right? 15 minutes waking up earlier, that's not going to make a big dent in your day. If that means listening to a podcast or something motivational on YouTube as you're loading the dishwasher or taking a shower or getting dressed, right? It's like stacking things on. So habit stacking is where you add something to what you're already doing. So if you know every day I got to get dressed or every day I got to take a shower, every day I got to do these things, think about how can I add a little piece of this practice into something that I'm already doing. And so it's not necessarily about finding more time in your day. I'm empowering my clients to be creative about the time that we have. And then the last thing I'll say is like, if I ask everyone who's listening to this to pull up your calendar and you look at how much time you spend at work and how much time we spend with our children and with their extracurriculars and our partners and our friends and the baby showers and all the things that we're doing, right? How much time do you have on your calendar for you? For most people, we don't have much. But if you look at my calendar, I have time for myself scheduled every single day because I'm my greatest priority. And so the same way that we put our meetings and our family things and our events on the weekends, we have to really start being more diligent about putting time on our calendars for ourselves too. And so that's where the mindset piece becomes really important.
So much has come up for me in this response to the habit stacking. I definitely want to touch on. And there's another thing I want to mention. So, first thing I'll say is I had a friend of mine I was talking through sort of rewriting her professional story, or not rewriting it, revising it to fit who she has evolved to become. And she was saying how, like, oh, I haven't gotten back to you. I'm super busy. I'm trying to do, to your point with millennials, although I identify as Gen X, but that's another story for another day.
Y'all in there too. I threw y'all in there too.
I identify as that, but technically, according to my birth year, I'm a millennial. I'm on the cusp, though. Okay. She was saying, like, I'm trying to do this with the baby, and this with business, and this with current job, and this, right? Like all of these things. And also find time for myself, right? To work out, to get healthier. And she was like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know which one to choose first. And I was like, I got to say, choose you first, right? Yes. Like I've said this before, if you've heard any of my conversations, how my therapist, shout out to her, is always saying, we need to be pouring. We don't, what's in the cup is for us. Everything else, the overflow is for everyone else. So like you have to get to a point where there is even overflow to give to someone. If you are constantly getting up every day and there's not even enough in the cup for you, how productive are you being? How fulfilling are those relationships? How whatever the word is that you're aiming for, are you even reaching, are you even performing at the place or being present in a way that you want to be? So that's one thing I would say. And then habit stacking. Shout out to whoever's watching us live. I appreciate you and these comments. Habit stacking is something that I have found super, super beneficial. I think about, like I know that when I set my alarm and it goes off, I'm not getting up immediately. So those extra couple of minutes that I'm sort of rolling around in bed, I actually pull up my devotional and I just start looking at that as a way to get me going. And then on my walks, because I adore walks in nature, now that, spring, summerish time, I do my prayer when I'm on my walk, right? Or to your point, I have scheduled sort of these like abundance meetings with myself. And so, if I put that time on my calendar, then that's when I'm going to set aside time to either go into this mindset book that, I have probably not picked up in a couple of weeks, even though I started it. Like, so finding time to incorporate the things that I aspire to do on top of the things that I'm already going to be doing has been really, really, really game changing. Back when I was even in my days as a professional dancer choreographer, and I was traveling all over the city to teach classes or whatever the thing is, I often had my prayer time during, my drives too. So it's just kind of like, I think it's super, super helpful to sort of change your mindset, to your point, to not be like, oh, here's another thing I have to do. But to be like, how can I think smarter, strategically, and like incorporate it to things that I'm already going to be doing?
Yes. Yeah. Instead of listening to music on the car ride or being on the phone, right, gossiping and talking about the most up to the latest, whatever's happening on reality TV, it's like pop on a podcast, right? Like pop on something that feeds and nourishes your mind. And so we can absolutely get creative about how we find time for these things. And I wanted to just really quickly touch on what you said about just your therapist and filling our cups first. What I have found is that by doing this practice consistently, it has increased my capacity for life, right? Like to move through things. I used to get so stressed and so thrown off, right? If anything was thrown at me, it would just like take me out. And it's like something that would have took me previously a couple of weeks to recover from. I would have started self-sabotaging and spiraling. It takes me a couple of hours or maybe a day, right? Like I might have to pause and get myself together and lay under the covers and like hide from the world for a couple of hours or a day, but it's no longer days or weeks because I've built my emotional capacity because every single day I'm pouring into and inserting into myself. If you think about it like an ATM, it's like so many of us are withdrawing and taking from ourselves every day and like giving to, but we're not pouring into, right? And at some point, if you keep going up to the ATM machine every day and taking out $10, but you're not putting anything in there, it's gonna empty out. And it's the same thing with us. And that's how we end up in a state of burnout and shutting down and numbness. And so it's like, as much as we give to others and to the world, we have to also make sure that we're giving to ourselves in that way so we don't deplete ourselves and run out.
We literally have to put ourselves on the list. I've been seeing lately on social media, like, don't forget to put you on the list, right? And like, it's now, I believe, it's a non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
Before we go into burnout and, how I could see someone using this as sort of a reaction to burnout that you already have, but I think it's actually should be used differently. But before we get into that, can we talk about this idea of selfishness? I wonder what the sentiment is culturally around that now. I think self-care is becoming more acceptable, more commonplace, encouraged even. But can you talk to the person who sort of still feels like, if I do this, if I prioritize myself, if I put the hour on the calendar or however you do it, stacking it, if I put that time on for me, I'm taking away time from my child, I'm taking away time from my job. I am somehow not upholding the obligations that I have to myself and to my, to the community. Like, talk to that person who feels selfish.
Yeah. So there's two things I'll say to this. The first thing I'll say is that when you pour into yourself, you have a greater capacity and you show up better for all the other things in your life. So I'm a better mom, right? Typically. Now, don't get me wrong. Them kids, they be testing me, but I'm typically a better mom, right? Because I have a greater capacity to deal with life and all the things that come with being a mom. I'm typically a better friend. I'm typically a better, business owner, entrepreneur, a professional because of the capacity that I've built because I take care of myself daily. I'm less prone to get agitated and irritable in the way that I used 2 years ago because my stress isn't built up in the way that it used to be. So that's the first thing. It's like really so the way that, if you think about it like a triangle, the way that we are typically conditioned is that you kind of start from the top and prioritize all these things. And like whatever is left, if there's anything left, you give it to yourself. And I always tell people flip it, right? Now I'm at the top, right? And now because I prioritize myself first, I have a greater capacity for all these other things on my to-do list. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
If that doesn't convince you, the second thing I will say is that I am extremely, extremely passionate about the work that I do because I've seen firsthand what happens when we don't prioritize ourselves. So when we move through life as if we are invincible and we don't have the time and all of these other things are important, it will eventually catch up to you, right? It might be a dis-ease, it might be an illness, it might be an ailment, it could be something even more serious. But when you fail to take care of yourself, when you neglect your body and your mind, right, it's going to eventually catch up with you and it might shut you down. My grandmother, who's no longer with us, so she's an ancestor now, when she passed away, and I got older and I started asking questions to understand her life because as a child, I took care of my grandmother. Like I helped my mother and my family take care of her. As a child, I just knew she was sick, but I didn't understand the why of why she was sick. So she passes away and I get older and I start asking questions and looking at her life history and really trying to understand her story better about why she struggled with so many things. And what I learned is that my grandmother, at a very young age, 2 years old, she lost her mother. And it was just like this spiral of, trauma, let's just say trauma, right? All her life, right? Divorce, rape, all of these things. Back in those days, they weren't going to therapy, right? They weren't doing yoga. They weren't moving their bodies. They didn't know about self-care. They didn't even, know to prioritize those things. So my grandmother goes through her whole life with all of these unresolved traumatic issues and all this stress. And she's putting everyone before her because that's the type of woman that she was. And at 50 years old, my grandmother had a brain aneurysm, right? And then she went on to have multiple strokes. She had diabetes. She had high blood pressure. She had high cholesterol. And so she spent the last 25 years of her life a shell of herself, right? Having to be taken care of, right? Feeling like a burden to the people that loved her, angry at life because of how she had ended up. The first 50 years, though, she didn't prioritize herself. She didn't make time. Maybe she didn't think that she had time because she had to take care of these kids and all the other excuses that we make. And so I share that to say that the reason why I ride so hard for, my work and why I'm so passionate about this work is because I'm like, I have seen and witnessed firsthand what happens when we don't. And so why allow yourself to get to that point? And as this 37-year-old version of myself, I remember in my early days, I just thought, oh, 50 is old, right? She just had a brain aneurysm because she was old. And I'm like, girl, she was in her prime. Like 50 is prime life, right? Like you are literally just getting the hang of the life, like just taking the training wheels off, honestly, of adulthood. And so it shifted my perspective. And so I share that to say, we believe that we don't have time to prioritize ourselves, but honestly, you can't afford not to. You really cannot afford not to.
It costs too much. You cannot afford. Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, it has me thinking like when I get to the into my end of my life, if I know that's the end of my life, like how will I be proud of the way I stewarded my body, my calling, my everything, right? And so yeah, I think that's really, really important. If you think about even your car, and this is going back to what I wanted to get to in terms of prevention versus like, trying to do this once you're already burnt out. You have a car and you know that you have routine maintenance that you have to do. You've got to get your oil changes. You've got to rotate the tires. You've got to make sure, right? You've got to do all of those things. And if you don't do those things, right, then the car breaks, it does the thing, right? You're stranded, your accidents, whatever. Or even I think about dentists. And when you go to the dentist's office and they see there's this sign that says if you ignore them, they'll go away. Meaning like, don't brush your teeth, don't floss, don't do anything, and they'll fall out, right? And so, same thing when it comes to our mind, our body, and our spirit. Like if you're just going through life sort of ignoring them, you get to burnout, and then you think, oh, let me do some self-care, let me get a massage. I think, not to say that's too late, but like I think you're missing the point of it all, right? So let's talk a little bit about, prevention versus like using this after you've already burned out.
Yeah. So I believe in being proactive versus reactive. And proactive is, like you said, taking a consistent, hopefully daily approach to self-care. Yesterday, I led a workshop for a client of mine, a client organization, and I talked about self-care and aftercare, right? So self-care is the ongoing maintenance that we do for ourselves, right? That's hopefully the preventative maintenance. Aftercare is the recovery, right? So you have a really stressful day. Aftercare is taking a warm bath to allow yourself to come back to a place of balance, right? Aftercare is maybe getting out with girlfriends and, laughing the week off if you've had a stressful week. So aftercare is recovery, right? Self-care is the ongoing maintenance. And we have to, for our optimum well-being, we have to have both of those, right? It's not about waiting until you're shutting down, right? Waiting until you're sick and you have been sick over and over and you can't get well and you keep catching colds and, flus and all the things to be like, oh, I need to do something better. It's about, what is my ongoing practice to take care of myself? Just like you said with our cars, I think a lot of us, right? A lot of people do better with maintaining their cars than they do themselves. We get our oil changes, we get our tune-ups, we get our tire changes. We want our bins to stay looking good. I don't have one, but y'all want y'all want your cars to stay looking good and driving well. And like, are you taking care of yourself and your body that well? And so I always say, by the time you get to the point of the Netflix binge for the weekend and all you have left is to sit on the couch and watch TV because you're burned out and you're numb and you don't want to be bothered and your phone is off and you're shutting out the world, there were so many signs that your body was communicating to you before that point that you either missed or chose to ignore, right? And so it's about, how do we build our self-awareness, right? How do we build a better relationship with ourselves so we begin to listen to ourselves better? The same way that we are in relationship with our children, our spouses, our friends, we also have a relationship with ourselves to maintain. And when our bodies are communicating to us, it's our job, right, to listen. When your body is tired and it tells you you're tired, it's your job to listen, right? When you feel that tightness and tension in your neck and your shoulders, that's your body saying, hey, I need you to rest, or I need you to move your body to release this tension. When you start noticing that you're having a hard time sleeping, right? You're either having a hard time sleeping or waking up in the middle of the night, waking up not feeling rested, that's your body's way of saying, hey, we need to slow down, right? I need some self-care. And so what we have to do is really, again, build a greater relationship with ourselves so that we begin to recognize those signs and symptoms before we get to the point of burnout, right? And then again, it's about, what are my ongoing practices, right? Like, how can I just work this into my routine? Because the reality is that all of us are busy, like we talked about earlier, and all of us are dealing with stress on a daily basis. Now, the depth of that stress might look different from day to day. So maybe today I'm stuck in traffic and that's stressful. Maybe tomorrow I get an unexpected bill and that's stressful. Maybe the next day my children are acting crazy and that's stressful. Maybe the next day it's my partner. Maybe the next day it's my job. Maybe the next day it's my business. But every day there's something that's coming up. And so when you think about it like that, it's like, if every day you're dealing with stress, every day, ideally, you should be doing something to manage and release that stress. And when we start looking at it like that as a non-negotiable, right? Like, let me make sure again that I'm hitting the reset button every day. It helps us to not get to this point of burnout, right? And I'll finish by saying, I joke that I used to be the queen of burnout. Years ago, before I started doing my wellness work, maybe I was the president of the club. Like I'm recruiting all the members because I was always burned out. And what I realized was that like now in years, I can honestly say, of course, I have days where I'm tired, but I can probably count on one hand in the last 5 years how many times I've been burned out, where I'm shutting down and just done. And it's because I have this daily practice of taking care of myself. It used to be this vicious cycle of I would burn out, I would do the things that I needed to get out of that cycle. Maybe 2 or 3 months later, I'm right back in the same place. And I was just always existing that way. And that's no way to live, for one, right? It doesn't feel good. You're not productive. You don't show up well for the people around you. And so when you start doing these ongoing practices, it helps to prevent you from ending up at that space of burnout.
Mm-hmm. It really is a quality of life situation.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the quality of your physical, mental health, your being? What's the quality of your relationships? What's the quality of your work in terms of how you're showing up in work? It literally is, not to sound super morbid, but like just for illustrative practice, like purposes, if you think about, not wanting to be sort of in a vegetative state, if we're ever harmed or sick, and just sort of, people always say that's not a quality of life, that's no way to live. But think about if you're just sleepwalking and burnt out and just like not present for your entire life either. Like that is not, it literally is just a matter of like, what type of quality of life do you want to have? How do you want to be showing up for yourself and for the people around you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as parents, right, we're so busy.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a really easy excuse for, I don't have time to take care of myself. But you also have to think about the message that you're sending to your children. My mama, right, strong Black woman, all the things. Growing up, I didn't see her prioritizing herself. So I learned, right, to not take care of myself. That was the message that was passed down to me. That's not the message that my children see. My children know every day when I drop them off to school, I'm going to the gym, right? 5 or 6 days a week. They know that's my routine. On the weekends, we're walking together. They grab their scooters or their skates and we're active together, right? I'm calling them in to do yoga sometimes. Like it's not only about you. It's also about the legacy that you're leaving for the people around you, especially your children, right? And so that's another thing. While we think that our children are maybe an excuse or hindrance for why we can't do the thing, they motivate me, right? I'm like, I don't want my children to see me not even remotely close to how I had to observe my grandmother be. And so that's another thing. Like, let your children be your motivating factor and not the excuse for why you can't do the things, because you are creating a legacy by the life that you live. And so if you're always in a state of burnout and exhaustion and you're angry and you're irritable, and like, how many of us grew up with parents that were always mad and we couldn't understand why? They were tired, they were stressed, right? They were overwhelmed because they weren't taking care of themselves. And so it's like, do you want your children to have that sort of experience? Or do you want, like you said, y'all to have a better relationship, a better quality of life, right? What type of parent do you want to be, and what type of values do you want to model for your children becomes something that you really have to sit with also.
So good. Okay, last question, just in case anybody's doing a little lunch and learn, or even if you are catching this on replay. What's the first step? You gave some really practical advice on habit stacking, but if someone's like, okay, you've convinced me, I'm not gonna sabotage myself anymore, what's the one thing maybe that they can do to get started?
Yeah. So 2 things. The first thing is find some accountability. Studies show that when you have a goal and you have an accountability partner or some sort of system, maybe you can be self-accountable and make sure that you check in with yourself consistently. But when you have some sort of accountability system in place, you're 40% more likely to achieve the goal. 40%. So just by having accountability, you're almost halfway there at the start. So the first thing I would say is that if you want to live healthier, you want to have a greater well-being, find someone who can hold you accountable. And not sometimes I wouldn't recommend someone close to you like a partner or a best friend, because they might not hold you up to the standard that you need to be. They might let a lot of shit fly. Find someone where you care about their opinion enough where you're going to keep your word to you and them, right? So find an accountability partner, right? Let them know your goal. Let them know how often you're checking in. Let them know what you're trying to do, and really hold yourself to checking in with that person. And the second thing is start small. So if you're you're listening to this and you're like, sis, I do not have an hour, I'm like, okay, we can talk about it offline one-to-one. But in the meantime, start with 2%, right? So instead of an hour, give yourself 30 minutes and allow yourself to build. And what's going to happen is when you start with that 30 minutes, right, you're going to start noticing that you feel better. You're going to start noticing that you're less stressed. You're going to start noticing that you're a little bit more patient. You're going to start noticing that you're a little bit more energized. And that's going to motivate you to want to give yourself more time. And you'll notice that your 2% maybe becomes 3%, or, eventually you get to that 4%. And so don't be afraid to start small and build. If all you have as you listen to this today is, all right, I'm going to shut down my computer and take a 10-minute walk around the block, right? That counts, right? I always say that it's about the consistency versus the duration. So I would much rather you give yourself 5 to 10 minutes every day versus just waiting until the weekend for that 1-hour yoga class. Because again, we're experiencing stress every day. So get creative about where can I find 5, 10, 15, maybe a half hour in my day. And if you have to break it up, but put it on your calendar. The same way that we prioritize all the other things in our lives and they are on our calendar, put it on your calendar. I always say if it's not on your calendar, it's not even real.
That's a word. Thank you so much, Dominiece. Well, where can folks find you? I see domrclifton.com, but do you have any other thoughts you want to share in terms of getting in touch, connecting with you?
Yeah, so the best place to go is my website, because I have all my contact information there. You can learn more about the work that I do. For anyone who's an entrepreneur that's listening, a woman entrepreneur, and you might be feeling like I'm stuck. I have this vision, I want to grow it, but I'm not sure where to go, what to do. On the homepage of my website, there is an entrepreneurial clarity assessment, which is a quick 3 to 5 minute quiz that you can take, which you answer a few questions, and it gives you an archetype, which is essentially like our patterns and our habits and the way that we are showing up and sometimes self-sabotaging. And so my website is the best place to go to stay connected with me. I'm on social media, but not a lot, so I usually don't share that out much.
That is perfect. Make sure that y'all find Dominiece at domrclifton.com. Take that quiz, get tapped in, connected. Let her help you birth the dream that you have on the inside of you. And while you're at it, if you need some inspiration along the way, make sure you check out thepurposepost.com for anything that you need to keep you engaged on your journey to more purpose, growth, and freedom. So all of the articles, again, all of these videos, replays to these conversations, even more than I'm learning about personal and professional growth, all of these stories to see how people are building their businesses and all the fumbles they've had along the way and how they're continuing to move forward anyways. You need all of that to keep you going, right? So make sure you tap into thepurposepost.com. Thank you again, Dominiece, for joining me on this conversation, for helping people get their wellness and their mind right for Mental Health Awareness Month as they're pursuing their goals and dreams. Anything else, final thoughts you want to share with folks before we head out?
No, thank you for having me. It is always an honor and a pleasure just to be able to share wisdom with other people. And it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And so I'm just grateful to be able to be in the space with you today.
Amen. Amen. I'm grateful for you as well. Y'all, go ahead and make sure you calendar your 4% for yourself. Your quality of life, your success, your professional development depends on it. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, y'all.